Let the Hangar 9 from Horizon Hobby begin. This too is a NES approved airplane, guys. Excited to put this one together. We have some fun things happening on this aircraft. Great beginner aircraft. I've seen lots of videos from these things already and they look outstanding. So let's start this process. So if you missed the unboxing video, I'll put a link down below to the unboxing video of this aircraft. It's pretty cool to see that come out of the package. Small box, shipped well, no issues. Thumbs up. Okay, so like normal, the first thing we like to do in our aircraft assemblies / builds is to look at all the equipment that's going in the aircraft. So let's take a look at the equipment. All right, so first of all, because it's on the ground and in front of us, we ordered the Revic wing bag setup. So this is the Hangar 9 setup with the conventional fabric wing bags and surface bags. Very nice set for this aircraft. All right, so our power plant for this aircraft is the ever small Swewin 80 engine. Nice little guy that's going to be perfect for this aircraft. Also, all the new Swewin engines are coming with the new fuel pump. It's the same fuel pump, it just has a connection there instead of the old wire sticking out. So a nice little running change on the Swewin lineup of stuff. Of course, we're using a Cortex Pro on this aircraft because that's what we use. They work amazing. Our servos, we're going with some very nice servos for this aircraft. So we've got the MKS 747s. So these will be 3 of them in the tail section, vertical and horizontal stabs. And one of them is going to be the steering. That's that setup. And we've got MKS 9930s. Great servo. These are going to be in the wings, so ailerons and flaps. That's our servo setup. This aircraft's going to be piloted by a Jetty radio system. So we'll be setting it up on our Jetty DS24 radio. And this aircraft is going to have an R3 paired with the DSM-10 for the on-off and battery control. The primary receiver here is going to be a Rex 12. Now this is going to pair very nicely with the Cortex and the DSM-10 setup. So what happens with the Rex 12 is you've got your battery plug here, which pairs up perfectly with the DSM-10, and we're going to have some channels in the Rex used, some channels in the Cortex used. So with Jetty, Cortex, very cool setup. Model Aviation products for the UAT trap. Of course, all the stock stuff. We're going to be using power box wires and ends just like normal. Amazing stuff, works great, very nice. So that is the equipment lineup on this aircraft. We also have a Sky Candy landing light or light setup for this aircraft coming. Sky Candy is currently working on the light setup. I've seen some pictures already, and those guys are doing amazing stuff for this aircraft. So we'll be planning for that installation, but basically they've have some lenses that are going to work on these tip tanks, cutout diagrams and everything. So look for that in future 339 videos, but we will plan for the entire lighting setup for this aircraft. So that pretty much covers the equipment that's going in here. Typically when we start a build like this, we start a new model in the radio, we update all of our Jetty stuff, and we get our servos burning in or cycling to get them working. So let's cover that. Okay, so we've got our servo hooked into our Jetty box. This Jetty box is not necessarily a Jetty specific device. It's used for servo setup, servo cycling, lots of different things. And we've got our power going into the Jetty box as well. So we're going to hit impulse generator no, servo cycle yes. 990 cycles, that's the max of the unit. It's started. We're going to increase the travel to 500, which is the max, and we're going to increase the speed, which is the V number there, to 30. That's just what I always set it at. So now that servo cycling away, it'll take about 20 minutes per servo to go through its cycle. So people very commonly ask, why do I do this? Well, the point is, if electronic devices are going to fail, it usually happens at the beginning of their life. So that's the whole intention behind this, is we want to get those servos working, 990 cycles. If there's going to be a problem with the servo, we want it to show up during this burn-in process. All right, so we're just cycling our servos here, and I did try this for the first time using a Y, and it does work great. Obviously, it doubles the speed of the servo cycling. But we've got 3 done, working on 2 right now. So we set the model up in the radio using our blank model and just customized it for this aircraft. So here's our channel layout. So we got throttle, aileron, flap, aileron 2, elevators, rudder gear, and that's the channel layout. So we've added lights in there as well. Now, it's kind of key when you're using the Cortex that your gyroed surfaces are in your first 16 channels, which obviously on this aircraft they are, because we're only really using 13 channels or 13 functions on this aircraft. All right, so we're ready to begin in the manual. We're going to follow the manual with this aircraft for the most part, because if you guys are building one, it's going to make the most sense to just go through these steps in the manual. So first thing is hinging. We're going to get our wings ready to go, and we start off with flap hinging and aileron hinging and control horn mounting. So that is going to be step number 1. Let's pull our wings down and get ready. All right, guys, there's a shot of the wing with the flap off. So everything looks really good. We've got hardwood points there to mount our control hinges or our pivots to. One thing I'll do on this is our joint there between the top skin and the rib and the wing. We'll run some CA across that. We got a couple areas where we've got some gaps, but otherwise looks good. The surface itself looks good. So step 1 in the manual, pull all the pins out, and you got a couple things to do here with the pins. So when you're hinging stuff like this, you want to make sure you lubricate the actual pin or hinge portion. So if you get any epoxy and stuff on there, it doesn't stop it from moving in the future. And then they're also saying, because there's a screw in these guys, to just make sure that the screw is adjusted properly. And we'll probably take it one step further, and we'll put a drop of CA on the other end to hold those threads in. So once it's adjusted, it doesn't back out. Now we do have a little bit of a shipping oops here. We saw that when we unpackaged the aircraft, so we'll do our best to fix that up. I may just put clear tape over it, because I don't think I have this color blue. So anyways, we'll check and see on that. The other thing I think we're going to do in this spot here is I'm going to paint this white as well, just to white or black, just a solid color to get rid of the wood. Because when this flap comes down, it's got this entire area is exposed. Okay, so we've got all of our hinges out. We ran a bead of CA down our joint here on everything just to get that nice and cured, so that's done. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to paint this this whole surface here and make sure we are happy with the look. Pulled all the covers off. Those have been marked. Aileron, flap, right and left. All right, guys, so we've got our back part of our flaps painted. We ended up using silver because I think it looks good. Pulled all of our hinges out. We've done our screws up, and what I did was tighten them till it was fairly resistive, and then backed them out a little bit so they're moving smoothly. So we'll put some CA on both sides of that to hold them in place, and then put a drop of silicone oil on them. Next thing we're doing is we've cut the flap mounting location for the actual hardware. So this is exactly how it's shown in the manual, and we will use our heat iron and get that fastened down, and then we'll be ready to hinge our flaps. Okay, so we've got our flaps mounted. Pretty straightforward. Basically just tuck them in nice and tight. Because of this hinge design, they're naturally going to not have any interference on the root of the flap or the edge of the leading edge of the flap. So we've taped those in place so their spacing is nice and solid. I believe the next step is going to be to pull these pins out one at a time and glue them in place. So I wouldn't generally use a nozzle, but for this situation, getting the epoxy in the holes, the nozzle that attaches to the high sol or tubes, aero epoxy tubes, is awesome. So one thing I'll do in advance here is I'll take my heat gun, warm this material up. I've taken the label off so the label doesn't melt, but this is 9462 material, and it's ideal for this situation, but we'll just make it nice and warm so it flows and mixes well in the nozzle. Okay, so we've got all of this wing completed now. So all of the hinge points have been glued. The only thing I did above and beyond is I put a piece of tape at the tip end of the flap on both sides. So now it's holding this flap surface perfectly still. Previous to that, without this tape, the flap surface could move in and out. So now it's stationary. So what we'll do now is we will take trusty bent screwdriver. Well, that's not trusty, that's trusty. And we're just going to make sure we get some of our adhesive all around that pivot or the pin. So we'll just go through and do that. Really not much to do there. That one was pushed up a little bit. And the nice thing about the Hysol 9462 is you have some working time with it. So really, like within about an hour, 2 hours, it may start to kick off at that point. But really, you have like 3-4 hours before it's like fully sort of set, so it won't move as easy. Downside with it is now we want to make sure we don't do anything too crazy with these hinge points, because they're still going to be movable for that period of time. So now we'll take some rubbing alcohol and we'll just clean up around our pivots. There we go, and that's pretty much the process for hinging your surfaces, at least the flaps in this case. I'll show you guys the details of the ailerons and the other surfaces, but very similar to what we just did here on the flaps. Okay, so now we're moving on to the ailerons here. Now these bags aren't clearly marked, so there's shows the zigzaggy horns, as I'll call them that. So we've got 2 bags with the zigzaggy horns, but if you look at the base here, one is small, one is big. I'm assuming the small ones are going to be for the elevator control surfaces. So what I did here was locate the slots built into the aileron surface, took the X-Acto knife, just put a little slit there, and yes, we can confirm that those slots are the correct size for our aileron control horns. Now those are pretty serious looking horns. They look good. It's also nice to see them lined up right on the hinge line as well. That's good to see. So we do have our 2 bases here. I'm not reading the instructions, so I'm not sure if it even says this. I'm just doing this with my normal practice. So usually what I would do is I would put this on the surface, cut out the covering, or at least almost all of the covering, so you get a good bond with the little patch piece there to the actual surface itself. So what we want to do is we want to sand these guys down as well, so there's better glue gun contact. So we'll take a little bit of sandpaper, sand each side of those guys, and also sand the gluing side of the flat plate. Okay, so before we do anything with the ailerons, we want to address our cut right there. So we could put clear tape over that, but let's take it one step better. So we're going to cover the underside of the ailerons in white. Overall, the scheme is quite nice. The entire underside of the aircraft, wings, fuselage is basically blue. The top side is all white or orange, so very light colored. So if we do white on the underside of the wings, it's going to look good, classy, intentional, and really won't make a difference overall in the scheme. So we'll just use some white covering and cover just the underside of both ailerons. All right, so we covered both of the ailerons in white. Obviously it looks different unless you know what you're looking for. It looks like it was designed that way. So the aileron pockets look like they're all done properly. We have to do the same thing with our pivot pins. We got to pull those guys out and just check them over. I can see this one looks like it needs to be tightened up, so we'll do that on all the pivot pins and get the aileron surface done. Okay, so we've prepped all of our pins here, so it's exactly the same as the flaps. So I screwed those screws in, backed them out maybe 3/4 of a turn until the pin felt good. Put a drop of medium CA on the threads, a little bit of kicker, and then we put some silicone lube on the hinge itself. So what we'll do here is we have to do one side at a time. So we'll put some epoxy in the hole on the wing, get this installed on all 4 spots here, and then we will do the exact same thing on the flap. So we'll put epoxy here, a little bit on the pin, install the flap, and we will tape it in place and let it cure. Step number 1 on the hinges, we will get our air epoxy installed on the wing side. Then we do a very light coating on the actual hinge itself. At this stage, it's not so important this amount that you put on the hinge because you can clean it up. But when we put the other surface on, it's fairly important because any excess that you have there is going to ooze out. There, so we'll do that for all 4. Okay, so we've got our glue installed on our surface side. We've got a very light coating on the pins on the actual wing, and now we'll get this installed. So what we're doing here is just getting the pins in the holes, and we don't really have to worry about the excess too much. So that's part of the reason why you want to make sure you lubricate those pins or the hinge point themselves. But with this design, Hangar 9 has left a nice big gap there, so it's not really an issue at all. So basically we're trying to get this as tight as possible. And what we'll do now is we'll take a rag, just wipe off the excess aero epoxy, and then we will tape it in place. Okay, so once you've got the high sol all cleaned up there, now we want to get our surface taped in place. So what we'll do, get a nice long piece of tape here, and we'll go on to the hinge there, or the actual flap. So because we want this to be basically as tight as possible, we're going to push our flap down or pull it down and tape it in place. Put one on the flap side. Now we'll do the same thing on the wingtip side. Just sneaking that down nice and tight. And there we go. So we got a nice tight hinge line. Looks awesome. Okay, getting into our aileron horn setup here. Those have been sanded. You can see on the plate there, one side's good, the other side's been sanded. Same thing with the base. So I used our X-Acto blade, cut that out. And now we have to get into the hardware side of things, which is this. So I'm happy to see that they included clevises as well as an extra ball joint. So in my opinion, if this all works out, the clevis would be my choice as far as what to use, but you have to do what's right for you. But in this manual, they do show, so I'm not sure what this is for. This might be for the flap, I think, but the manual shows using a ball joint on a plastic horn, which is an absolute no-no in my opinion. So there it is right there. So if you're going to do the ball joint, use a carbon, use an aluminum horn, or use a clevis if you're using a plastic horn. The plastic horns are amazing. They're totally fine to use, but you have to use a clevis on a plastic horn. Let me preface that. You do not have to use a clevis on a plastic arm, but if you choose to build the way I would build, that would be my suggestion. You do whatever you want to do. Okay, so we want to get a ball joint set up for our surface side. So we have a ball joint here. Now these ball joints don't come with the balls installed. When you look at the actual ball joint, you'll see a closed off end and you'll see an open end right there. So you want to make sure you squeeze that ball through the open end, because if you try and squeeze it through the closed end there, it's going to probably stretch that ball joint out to a bad amount. So we'll get that set up. And basically what we're doing is we're making this assembly right here. So we've got to have our ball joint going through the control arms and glue it all together so everything is nice and square. And just to be clear, a lot of the little things that I'm doing here, it's not written in the manual. These are just good building practice. So if you're following the manual 100%, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing probably is not going to do. So take it for what you will. But the next step, especially here, I don't think is shown in the manual, but it's just a better way to do it. So we've got one of our assemblies put together. So what we'll do now is we'll take a fine Sharpie and we are going to trace out around this whole assembly. Now, don't necessarily need to trace it. I can just cut it out fairly close to the actual slots. But what we're doing is we're getting rid of the covering so our actual whole assembly here can glue down and stick to the wood in this area instead of just the covering. Okay, so we've got our horn installed here. You can see the high sol oozing out of there, and that worked out perfect. So lots of high sol in the slots, covered the horns in high sol, slipped it in place. Going to be a great way to fasten that horn. So you got the horns glued into the surface, plus you've got the plate all tied into everything. So now we can leave that be and we'll get the other wing done to match. Okay, so with the hinging done on the wings, we're gonna move on to our other surfaces and just get all the hinging done so everything hinge-wise is complete and we can use our nozzle on our high sol. So really nothing changes when you're dealing with the elevators or the rudder. It's essentially the same thing and should be very much identical. So if we encounter anything weird, we'll show you guys, but yeah, we'll get those surfaces done next. All right, so we're moving on to the wings. We've got all of our hinging done, all of our surface mounting done. That's complete on every surface. Our other surfaces are just hanging out over here. So we've got our 2 elevators complete, and our rudder, I think, is sitting over there somewhere. Oh no, rudder's right there. Right now we're doing a live as well, so if you are interested in watching a live here on the channel, and we're up on the TV at the same time. Man, this is crazy. Check out the lighter side of RC, guys, after dark, of course, because we do live streams here from the shop about 2 hours a week, every 2 weeks. All right, so what we're gonna do is we are going to, we cut the covering out, and we've left just a little bit on the opening, so we can go to our heat iron, and we can get that fastened to the inside of the cover. And then we'll be able to work on mounting our aileron surfaces, horns, servos. All right, guys, so we're getting our aileron servo set up here. So when you look in the manual, basically your output shaft of your servo should be away from the surface. So we've done that. We opened up our openings here, got all that fastened down, and I don't generally use the grommets and rubbers on the servos when I install them in a turbine aircraft, unless we need them spaced out. So in this case, we do need them spaced out. This servo setup is very much designed for that spacing. So we're going to use our rubber grommets, and that brings the servo output shaft basically right in line with the center of this opening, and that also brings it in line with the ball joint. So we're using the ball joint on that side, a clevis on this side. Perfect setup. All right, so we've got the wiring all set up here for our wing. Now we are planning on our wingtip lights, which we will be getting from Sky Candy. So I'll throw some pictures up here of what that looks like. Very cool setup for this aircraft. So what we've done is we've planned out for both wings. We've cut 2 wires at each time. So we've got our wire cut from the wingtip to the root, the aileron to the root, flap to the root. Now, like usual, guys, I always suggest not using your servo wire in your distance. So if you install this servo right there and you take that wire and go to here, well, if you ever have a problem with the servo, that wire connection could be buried in the wing somewhere and you will not be able to get to it. So I always bundle my wires up at the servo point itself, and my connector is going to come all the way to here, and it's going to be a very easy change if you ever have to change that wire or servo out. So now we've got our wires set up here. Now it's time to crimp on our ends, and we'll get those wires run to the root of the wing. All right, so just in doing these wings, just a couple points here that I've kind of figured out. When you're looking at your control horn surfaces, it looks like because our ailerons are designed to have a clevis on the servo arm side, the linkage or rod designed for the aileron has the nut already installed. The longer one should be for the flaps. So that should be the telltale sign that that is the way things are designed. And then I'm assuming these 2 are going to be for the elevators. That one's probably going to be for the rudder. So that kind of gives you the layout. If I was to do this again, I would install the rod prior to installing the ball joint on our horn setup here. Just is going to make things easier. I could undo these, but these are very difficult to get in the horns, so I'm not doing that. But we're getting closer here. I'm just bottoming out the rod in the control or ball joint. Nice thick rods on this kit, which is great to see. So very, very durable. No reason to add any reinforcement on this at all. I will not be using the nut when I put my clevis on here. We'll just be using CA as that's the normal practice. So I'm going to continue threading this in until we bottom it out, and we should be okay to set this aileron up. All right, so getting the flaps set up here, we've got our flap wire run to the root of the wing. Also with the aileron, I'm not going to hook any of my clevises or anything up yet until we get our servo plugged in and all of our surfaces are off and moving and everything. So I'll just leave this flopping around like that, and we can get that connected later on. So our flap here, I've taken a look at the wing. Both of the flap servos are in the same position. So generally with most wings, right flap would be like this, left flap would sit like that. But this aircraft allows you the ability to have flaps with one servo channel split with a Y because both flaps are in the same position. We're not going to do that as far as splitting the channels, but it's nice just to know how you're going to get your flaps set up. So when these flaps are fully extended, this is the right flap servo for the right wing. When this flap is fully extended, it's going to be straight like that. When it is retracting the flaps, it's coming this direction. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get these flap servos set up in the radio with our horns mounted and get that programming done. That flap servo sits in there like that. So the output shaft is towards the leading edge of the wing, away from the actual surface itself, just for reference on how that fits. Okay, so we just got our flap servo set up here. Now this is very much a jetty thing and how we do things, but anyways, I'll just show you how we basically have it set up. So I don't know if any of our travels and stuff here are going to be appropriate right now. We have set up our carbon horns to be what the manual suggests, which is 16 millimeters. So we took the MKS carbon horns, drilled our own hole at 16 millimeters, and we've got matching servo arms. So flaps, full flaps, we've got the whole linkage system going straight. Now what that's going to replicate is that's going to go straight towards the actual flap itself. We may have to do a little bit of adjustment there, but at least we're paired up now. And take off flaps and flaps off. So we've got multiple adjustments in all those areas, but now we've got a paired up set of servos. So we're going to put our servo fastening screw on each of these servos, and we can get our right servo mounted in the aircraft. Okay, so looking at the manual here now, I'm ready to mount our flap horn on the flap itself. So if you look at the way this is organized, they've basically flipped the flap all the way open, which we've taken our tape off the flap. Our hinge points are now all cured. So there's our flap open. And as far as the servo goes, I don't know if I'll be able to show you guys, but there's the flap mounting surface. So that guy right there, we are on, it's about as wide as my two fingers right here. So we're going to be on this edge of the mounting surface. So if we open that up, come around to the other side. So our horn is going to mount in this location. So I'm assuming we just want to pay attention to the diagram here. So the horn is going to get mounted just like that. So let's get this guy mounted on the flap. Okay, so our servo's not fastened, but we've got our linkage installed here, and we've got our linkage kind of temporarily installed on the flap itself. So the point of doing this is to try and get our travel to the manufactured recommendation, which is 70 millimeters, which we are currently at, which is perfect. So we know where this one needs to be. What we can do is we're not even going to bother matching the two linkage lengths and stuff, because you never know if this is a little bit off between the wings. So we've got this measurement here, and we're going to get them matched up perfectly. Really the important matchup is the full flap, because you don't have any adjustment here in your radio. The full flap setting, when you're doing it this way, the proper way, is all purely mechanical. So we'll get this one set, screwed in place, finalized, and then we can take our angle finder and our distance measure and match the flaps up identical at full flaps. When we go to take off flaps, flaps off, we have those adjustments in the radio, at least with Jetty we do, but full flaps has to be a mechanical correct adjustment. All right, so just fastening the servo in here, and I'm going to put my last screw in. So I've pre-drilled the holes. We're just going to drop some CA in the pocket, and we will get our screw installed. So part of the reason I like to put some thin CA in those pockets is to obviously strengthen the wood, but you're also locking that screw in place when you screw it in with the thin CA in place. So it's actually a pretty nice servo mounting system in this aircraft. It's very easy to access and drill and everything with this being on the angle. So it's a nice design for sure. We bundled up our servo line in this area and put a zip tie around it, fastened it to our power box stuff, and used a little bit of shrink tubing to hold the connection together. All right, so here's a final shot of our flap setup. So we've got the flaps zeroed out right now, so it's all the way in flight mode or normal flying mode. You can see the location of the servo arm. So takeoff flaps is probably going to be somewhere about there, and landing flaps is the 70 millimeters, which is mechanically locked out, which is awesome. Taking our tape off of our aileron hinging, just kind of popped it free. So you do get some of the high sol that is kind of sticking the pivots together. But as soon as you pop it free, it moves very nicely, and we still get full movement to the limits of our actual surface deflection that's possible. So very nice. So wing number 1 is done, which is the right wing. We're going to match everything up on the left wing. I'm going to put the cover plate on here as well. So cover plate, right flap, pretty straightforward. We just pre-drill those 4 holes, and we'll use the screws that came with the kit. All right, took a little bit of blue paint and touched up our screws on the wing. That is looking fabulous. All right, guys, and that's gonna wrap up this video. Next video, we are gonna still focus on the wings, but we're gonna focus on getting the landing gear installed, our wiring installed. While you're here at the end of the video, don't forget to check out channel memberships listed down below. Channel memberships allow you to watch the videos way before they get released on YouTube. So cool little perk if you're interested. Thank you to you guys that have already joined channel membership. I really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to check out Lighter Side of RC After Dark. The After Dark channel is a completely separate channel, and basically we focus on doing live streams here from the shop for about 2 hours every 2 weeks, which is super cool. So it's also an opportunity to interact with us here at the shop. You can chat back and forth while the live's on, so ask any questions you want. So thanks guys for watching the 339 video from Hangar 9. Looking forward to progressing on this plane in the next video, and we'll see you in the next episode. Let me preface that. You don't have to use a plastic. Let me preface that. You don't have to use a clevis on a plastic ball.